All right, welcome back to another live. I'm your host, Joseph Lewin, and today's guest is Todd Rafael. I'm going to let him introduce himself in a second, but really he's focused on differentiating yourself in the market and how to stand out in the market. So we're going to be having a good conversation about why it's important to stand out in the market and some of the different things that you can do to position your company to not look and sound like everybody else. And that's going to help you close more deals, close them faster, close them with the right kind of people. So really looking forward to today's conversation. And with that, Todd, can you just give us a quick idea of who you are and what you're up to?
Yeah, I mostly work, not exclusively, but mostly with B2B marketing, so business to business marketing. Many companies in the HR technology field trying to help them get in front of their audience. So some people call it work tech or ed tech, education technology, but companies in the HR technology field and human resources services field.
Yeah, so I'd like to kick us off because this is a problem from my perspective. I've worked in B2B, primarily with B2B services companies or software companies that sell very complex software where you need some kind of consulting. And man, most of these companies really struggle to differentiate themselves. It's like if you take the messaging from one website and you bring it over to their competitor, it could be the same thing. They could copy and paste websites and swap out the logo in the faces, and every single other thing is pretty much the same. And what you get is the market has no idea why they should work with one person versus another. And as a business owner or a business leader, you want to be differentiated, right? You want people to know why they should work with you versus the competitor down the street. And if your answer is our people are what make us different, your competitor is going to say the same thing. So you really got to show and explain why. So I'd love for you to talk about why you feel like differentiation is such a challenge for B2B companies.
There's been a big effort over the years to talk about like ROI and data. So, we made recruiters 23% more efficient, and our technology will help you reduce turnover by 14% and make your company 50% more diverse. And there's been a big effort to kind of pull in that data and to talk about ROI. And that's good. That's not a bad thing. The problem is now there's thousands of companies that all offer these services, technology for retention and recruiting and whatever. But now they're all saying all that. We make you more productive and efficient, and it doesn't really mean anything anymore. So I think there are a few things missing. I can talk about them, but one of them is give me some specific scenarios. So there's companies that are in the space field of trying to make your meetings more productive. And they'll say you can, make your meetings more efficient and more productive, less wasted time and all that, and free up your time. That is all great stuff. And I think that's kind of like table stakes. But tell me, they don't give a lot of scenarios. If they hit home, give me a scenario, every Monday you meet with your product team or your customer service team for an hour at noon, and 2 people out of the 7 hog the microphone. They seem to talk a lot. And then the other people are told they're quiet because they don't really get a chance to get a word in edgewise because no one really asks their opinion or something. Give me a scenario like that will resonate with me, that will that make me think that's exactly how my meetings are. You just described it perfectly. That is the kind of a scenario. So, give me a scenario and not just your meetings can be more efficient, more productive. I get it. Do something that hits home with me.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, a lot of times people have focused on solutions and solution selling, and that's better than just pushing your product, right? And what you're describing there is starting to talk about solutions a little bit, but the scenarios are, hey, you need a CRM. I sell a CRM. You should buy mine. It's better, faster, more efficient, right? That's going to be just selling what you do, right? Or you need an accountant. Hey, I'm an accountant. You should buy from me. It's like, okay, that's service oriented. Then you've got the solution, which is, hey, you want something that's going to be more efficient, whatever. But like you said, that's really staying high level. Whereas what you're getting at, or what I've seen, is focusing more on what's the problem that somebody's trying to solve. And then to your point, I think the next level beyond talking about the problem is tell a story that illustrates how a very specific problem that either generally the market experiences, or if you're in a sales call, that person brought up, that illustrates how what you're doing solves a very specific problem. Now you're not talking about a service, you're not talking about the solution itself, you're really illustrating how a client or how somebody's overcome a big problem that they're experiencing. I feel like that's kind of a little bit of what you're illustrating there.
Yeah, I've seen it done like things like 5 reasons people call us, or 10 times you'll want to give us a call, something like that. And they'll set out these like quick little scenarios, like, you know, you're in crisis, an employee just went on leave all of a sudden and you weren't prepared, blah, blah. It depends on what the product or service you're selling is, but, you know,
Right.
10 reasons, the last 10 reasons people have called us this year. That's interesting. 10 interesting stories of real life. One of those is bound to hit home. You know, so there's so little of that done right now.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that there's so little of that being done?
Again, I think it was part of this trend, this idea of sameness. We all have to talk about data. We all have to talk about our ROI. We all have to, we hear these kind of things that we're supposed to do in B2B marketing, and then everyone copies the same thing. And then you hear about something else and everyone copies that same thing. So a lot of the B2B marketing websites, particularly in this field that I'm mostly in, this HR technology field, will have very, very similar sections. There'll be something called resources, which has blogs and which has webinars and whatever. And there's very little deviation from the norm. There's very few sections on a website that stand out because they're different. There's a lot of kind of looking at what your competitors are doing, looking at what other companies are doing, looking at what you think are the best practices, well-known, successful B2B marketing companies like Salesforce and others, and trying to do what they're doing. It's not a bad idea. It's just it can be a race to the bottom when everyone starts doing the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I might disagree with you a little bit on that, and just saying I think it is a bad idea, because most of the time when you're trying to copy an industry leader, that's a really big mistake, because they have the brand reputation already. They have the resources. They can burn a lot more capital and not see anything come from it and get away. Whereas the smaller your company is, especially if you get into like being a startup or, you know, a company that's doing 10, 20, 30 million in revenue, and you're trying to copy a $1 billion or multi-billion or $100 billion or $500 billion business, your chances of being successful copying them is extremely low, because they've defined the category. They kind of own that. And so you've got to figure out a way to show people why going with the category leader is a bad idea. Like they have to understand immediately or very quickly why doing the status quo is a bad idea if they're going to decide to work with you over an established brand.
Yeah. All right. Another thing that just thought of that companies do that I think they can do better. So companies typically have something that you could probably sum up as case studies or customer stories. People have different ideas. When I say those words, different thing comes to different people's minds. For me, a customer story is like a bunch of different components. It's like, did you help the customer speak at an event? Did you help them do a webinar? Maybe you applied for an award for them. You wrote an article about them, maybe for some external website like Business Insider. You have a little landing page on your website which talks about the customer success story, social media. It's like a multi-component package. So anyhow, case study, customer story. Here's the thing that I find that a lot of companies in marketing don't do. There's almost no people involved in their customer stories. They'll talk about how the product, for example, reduced turnover, fewer people quit, or it improved recruiting, more people were hired more quickly or something. They never do a video of a company, of someone who didn't quit, or someone who is a great employee who took a job there because of something that an employee saw on a website or whatever it was. There's so few stories of success of the customer, an interview with the customer, whether it's an HR leader or product leader or customer service leader, financial leader, whatever it is, or accountant, whoever your target market is, doesn't matter. Story in the form of an interview with a person, a 5-minute, 10-minute interview with a person, talking about their life. Oh, I was so stressed. Oh my God. We had too many meetings. Sunday, I dreaded Monday. And then we got this meeting software. And God, I just feel so much better about Mondays, blah, blah, blah. Like someone who could tell a human story about their life and their feelings, so much more powerful, a powerful component of a case study or customer story that so few companies are doing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I would call, this might not be fair, and maybe I'll get myself into trouble by saying something like this, but I kind of think of it as the MBA-ification of business, where you bring these people in who have gotten an MBA, and MBAs are very focused on running a solid business, and you got to look at the numbers, you got to look at your margins, you got to take all of the feelings out and be very systematized and logical about your business, right? And you're able to, when you do that, find tons of inefficiencies and things that maybe you do have an emotional attachment to, that you're just losing your shirt on, that you need to change or whatever, right? So there's a ton of value. But when you give anything, or if the CFO is the person who's, the primary decision maker on spending money, and you give too much weight to just purely dollars and cents logic, what you could put on a spreadsheet, I think that that's contributing to what you're talking about. Because basically what ends up happening is those people, when they're driving these decisions, they're not taking into account the people, right? That's the whole point of what they're doing, is saying, hey, we need to stop making emotional gut decisions. We need to make logical decisions. But when you do that when you go too far, it's like with economists. With an economist, good economists understand human nature, and they understand that people are not going to do the logical thing. And if you're not taking that into account into your economic projection, it's going to be way off, because people are involved, right? People make very illogical decisions at different points in time.
I mean, every time I see
people
take
that into account,
I mean, you'll look out the door and there's like a line around the block for some weird trinket that's like, you don't have to wait in line for, you could get anywhere else, but there's something about the herd mentality. But we digress. I mean, along the lines of what you were saying, a lot of B2B business thought, business school stuff talks about like understanding the customer. And a lot of the complaints that customers, in my case, sometimes they're like HR people, recruiters, their complaints are that companies don't really understand them. They're like people who have never done their job, who have some product idea, engineers or whatever they might be, business people, and they try to sell them a product, but they don't really understand their market. They don't understand the person. And what I'm talking about here with like the video and the customer success and case studies and talking about human beings is, you need to show your customer that you get them, that you are, you're empathetic, that you understand what their pain points are, what their challenges are, and what's on their mind. Otherwise, they're really not going to gravitate to your company. They're just going to feel like you're someone trying to sell you something.
Well, let's talk through a little bit of how people can do that, because, for one, I want to say I completely agree with you. And the most successful marketing things and messaging that I've seen is when you take time to understand customers. So we can dive into that a little bit. And then, on the other side, it's like, if you, the customer stories are not only powerful in your marketing, but it's powerful in sales too. Like the sales conversations I've had move the fastest are when I tell stories that illustrate exactly what somebody's asking a question about. So if somebody's telling me, hey, listen, I don't know if we're going to be able to get our folks on, our ideal customers to go on a show. So I help people start shows. Then I'm going to go, I have a client I've worked with who focuses on biotech companies, and they get chief medical officers from biotech companies to come on. And then I've run podcasts in the past where I've gotten the CEO of an engineering firm to come on and talk about GD&T, which is like super niche engineering topic, right? And one of the most successful shows my brother runs, and he has on drone detection specialists and people who are, detect the professors who are writing industry research on the problem of drones and drone mitigations. And so then, by sharing those stories, people start to go, oh, those are like very niche experts, and they're getting, they're getting their guests to come on the show. Maybe I could get my guests to come on the show too.
Yeah.
And when you start using actual stories, and then I can point them to like, hey, this is the show that I'm talking
Yeah.
about, where somebody's, gotten either similar or the same types of people you're trying to get on. That's so much more effective than me just going book a guest on your show, right? And
Right.
it's once you get into those more personal stories. So what are some things that you've seen work to dive more into what customers want, and really understanding your customers at that root level, like what you're describing?
Like, how do you figure out what customers want, or how do you communicate what you're selling to customers better?
So let's start with how do you figure out what customers actually want? Because I've found that a lot of companies do not understand, kind of to your what you said before, they don't understand their customers' pain points and problems enough to create that kind of messaging. So if a company wants to create messaging that's going to stick, what do you do to help them
It
understand their
sounds a
customers more
little,
effectively?
I mean, it sounds like a little too obvious, so I'm scared to say it, but like I've gone to conferences and I've seen some salespeople who are like so focused on selling that they discard human beings who are not they don't perceive as the customer. And they kind of like, because you don't want to spend time on someone at your conference booth who's not your potential customer. That's a waste of your time. You got to go on the next one. I've seen that, and then they miss out on conversations, on influencers, on people who know someone who's an influencer, people who know someone who's a potential customer. You miss out on so much when you have this thing in your head that I'm so focused, and it doesn't have to be at a conference. This could be on an online conversation, on anything. It
Yep.
sounds a little basic, but like you miss so much when you're focused like a laser on who you're. I've got to only focus on the people who are going to spend $1 on me. It's not really the mentality that I've seen work. It's the mentality, again, it's like probably sales 101, probably. I'm not a sales trainer expert, but it's probably best to hire salespeople who are interested in other people, who are just engaged in other people, who are very, very curious when they meet someone to learn about them, rather than someone who's focused on selling what they have to sell.
I mean, I couldn't agree with what you're saying more. And I would say the majority of marketers that I know and have met over the years, they're focused on delivering what they're being asked to deliver first, which becomes a problem when the leadership team says, hey, we need a blog post. Okay, marketer, go write the blog, and they go do that. Or we want to launch a podcast, and the marketer goes and launches a podcast. Or we need copy for our website, and they go write copy for the website, rather than going, okay, what is the goal? Our goal is to sell more of our product. And ultimately, the best way to do that is by serving the right people more effectively. And so, from a marketing perspective, and like you're saying, it sounds so basic, but people just don't actually do this. You have to talk to customers. You have to. And this is a word to marketers. If you're a marketer out there, go talk to customers. If your company won't let you talk to customers, find ways to go talk to the people who aren't customers, but are, in theory could be. And like to your point, Todd, talk to people who sell to the same clients. Go to somebody else's booth who's selling to the same type of folks and talk to that salesperson. And then if you're in sales, don't focus on the sale, focus on understanding the person. And when you really do that and you're curious, people want to buy from you because they like you. and then you're actually going to learn all these different pain points like you're talking about that you can really truly speak to. And it goes way further when you say, hey, are you experiencing this issue? There's a lot of people I've been talking to in the space who are dealing with XYZ. And they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, how do you know that? And when they feel like you've read their mind, they're going to be way more interested in listening to you than if you're like, hey, we have this solution here, take your pen. And now, let me tell you why my product's so much better than our competitor that does basically the same thing.
I was in July, I had a 1 month gig as like the marketing leader, marketing person, jack of all trades for a company in Utah. So in July, and some of the month-long gig was like, go produce some stuff. I did like a bunch of guides and blog posts and social media and relaunched a website and whatnot. But some of it was not. It was like unstructured time, like not defined. And I ended up just having different conversations with people in the industry. And one of the conversations I had was a guy I know named Steven, who I've known for a long time. And he was probably listening to this. And he told me that this conference called PSYOP, which is an industrial organizational psychology conference, a big deal, might need a speaker, and this company might fit as a speaker for this conference. I ended up hooking them up, and they got this potential speaker gig at this conference. But the point of all that is like, this conversation was not part of any assignment I had. That conference was completely off my radars. I mean, it's on my radar, but as far as something I was going to do for them, the whole conversation and the whole successful thing only happened because of part of my mandate was kind of open-ended. There was plenty of non-open-ended stuff, but part of my mandate was open-ended. And when you have time and interest to engage with people, those are the kind of things that can happen. I was also trying to get them some social, like LinkedIn followers. And I was like clicking on the people. I don't know if you've ever done this. If you have like the LinkedIn page, and then it gives you like 250 people this month, and you click on people. Okay. So it's like, I was clicking on the people who I knew to follow their page, and I got like 15 to 20% of the people I knew followed it. And some of them were really great influencers and target market customers and stuff. And the company was really happy about it. But that wasn't really about clicking on something. Those people follow the page because they know me for 30 years. And so this was like, see what Todd's up to. So it's like, so often what you're trying to accomplish would not be accomplished. If they just went and hired some social media person, they said, could you go click on some people to follow our page? Those people wouldn't click on the page. So it's really about, I hate to say this, another stupid cliche, but it's all about relationships, I guess, is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because for whatever reason, relationship has become this bad, negative word a lot of times in the business world. So if you go, hey, listen, it's like, you got to have relationships with the right people, then it becomes like, oh, well, that's exclusive, and it makes you make poor decisions and not put the company's best interest first, and like conflict of interest, and procurement departments specifically, they design all these things in so that you can't have relationships with people. But it's kind of bizarre because the best business people that I've talked to, whether it's in sales or CEOs, they lean on their relationships big time to make decisions, whether it's a relationship with a vendor or a relationship with a peer on what vendor they should work with.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is going a little bit off topic from messaging, but from my experience so far, when we're talking about high-end, especially services, if you sell a B2B service, you're way better off building relationships with the people who already have relationships with your ideal buyer than you are going and trying to cold call a bunch of people who you think are in market right now. Because who's more likely to...
Analysts, press, investors, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Peers of, peers who are never going to buy from you, but they like you, and they're stuck working with a different vendor and they don't have a choice, but they'll recommend you because they like you, they like your company, they feel valued and appreciated by you. And I think there's a bad end of that where people can, do something that's negative, but let's be realistic. It doesn't really do good for that person to bring in somebody who's going to fail, right? Yeah. Part of the reason we lean on relationships is because we trust that person is going to have our best interest at heart, right? Whereas if you're working with somebody you've never worked with before, they've never worked with anybody who's worked with you before, but they cold called you and they had the best price, that could go terribly wrong. And if I'm growing in my career and I'm sitting in the seat where I'm going to be the buyer, and in order to kind of move up the ladder to my next station, I've got to do something that moves the needle for my company. And any savvy person who wants to grow in their career is going to be thinking that way. And if they're not yet, they should be thinking that way, right? If you want to grow, especially in the corporate world, why would I bring in somebody that I'm friends with who's going to do a terrible job?
Right.
That's going to doubly make me look bad, right? But if I built a trusted relationship with somebody where I really believe they're going to do what's right by the company, both because they're good at what they do and because I have a relationship with that person that's been built over years and I've seen their work before, that's a much smarter idea to do that, right?
Yeah.
And that's how, anyway, that's how a lot of the decisions for really big purchases get made. They don't get made because somebody went and downloaded an ebook from the website.
Right.
They get made because CEO 1 talks to CEO 2, who happens to know a vendor personally and makes a recommendation, and that person gets the work
Yeah.
over the person who wrote the crazy blog post and everything. I know I'm going way down a rabbit
I
trail.
mean, I think maybe the blog post, the webinar, the ebook, the guide, the white paper, the LinkedIn post, the tweet, those things may get on the radar screen of someone who goes to someone else, who goes to someone else, and they have the relationship or whatever it might be. It's kind of part and parcel of the process. So, there's obviously been lots and lots of data showing it can take 55, 60, or 200 times of touches to sell something in B2B marketing, whatever it might be. So all of those are blog posts and white papers and downloads and all that. But ultimately, those are all part of something important. The relationship is part of something important too. I was going to say when you were talking that, at least in this world that I am in, this sort of HR technology world and HR vendors, there are people who are influencers, analysts, and they have a reputation for being kind of moderate, like having really good judgment. And then there are others who basically have the reputation as being kind of like more sellouts, like I'll recommend whatever someone pays me to recommend. And so I think it's like a huge thing to sort of get the eyes and ears of the people who have kind of that more wise or more reasoned and respected reputation, perhaps, than just trying to get on the radar of someone who has the reputation of being sold to the highest bidder or whatever.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just to kind of level out that part of the conversation around relationships and touch points and everything like that, I think the challenge from my perspective is in marketing, there's a lot of things that we can do, but we have a limited amount of time. And for whatever reason, the focus has been primarily on what are the things that we can do to create all of these extra touch points. So we're like posting every day on social. We're trying to get people to follow our LinkedIn page. We're writing all these blog posts. We're creating video series and YouTube channels and all this stuff. I met a billionaire earlier this year and I went to his website. It's the worst website I've seen in 20 years, legitimately. And he's a billionaire. And why? Because he knows all the right people and they trust him and they do business with them. And so it's like, what are the things that we can do first and focus most of our attention that actually build those quality relationships and get us in front of and building network with the right people? Let's do that first and focus there first. And then when we have the revenue and we have, the time, then focus on those other pieces. And to me, it's like, what are those things that get you in front of the right people that help them to trust you? And sometimes that's content. And so I'm saying that can be part of the mix. But what ends up happening is I download an ebook, I educate myself on something, then I call my friend and I go, hey, I've done some research. What do you think about this? And he goes, oh yeah, I like this over that, but you should work with this person over here to do it. So now, they just paid to educate me and create all these blog posts for me just to go to my network and end up working with somebody else who didn't have any of that stuff anyway. So if you're not careful, you can end up creating all of this content that ends up educating somebody to the point where they work with a competitor who's built that network and built those friendships. But anyway, we were talking about differentiation. And so to kind of pull it back full circle and kind of end on the note of differentiation, to me, I think you said it really well. It's focusing on relationships, whether you're in sales or you're in marketing. If you want to create messaging that's going to connect with people, have conversations with people who are actually decision makers, and then have conversations with people who aren't a decision maker, but they're going to be impacted the most by either your product getting implemented or your product not getting implemented, and understand what it's doing for that person. And if you can dig in and you can really understand the pain points and problems and the goals of the business goals of the people you're talking to, then to your point earlier, you can craft stories, customer stories that you can have in your back pocket for different scenarios that are going on in the market. And when you can do that, that's much more effective language than the generic features and benefits.
Well said. Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, Todd, you had some great, insightful things to share. How can people find out more about you? And I know you're doing some different projects, so I'd love for you to just pitch a little bit about what you're up to and how people can find out more.
Yeah, definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Todd Raphael. It's if you're listening, it's TODD and then RAPHAEL. And variety of marketing projects, some of which we've talked about here. Some of it focused on content, but not all of it. Some of it's demand generation and working with partners, partner marketing, customer marketing, public sector marketing, and more. So yeah, hit me up, and I'd love to, as we've talked about, just make a new relationship.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Todd. Really enjoyed our conversation. You definitely have seen some things in the market that I think are really big problems that if people haven't recognized that they have it, they should, because it's a huge issue where people don't really understand their customers and are just pumping out content that sounds just like everybody else. So thanks again. And you'll see you all next time.